It was the smell that got to him first. Not the musty odor of decay you find in abandoned places, but the sharp, metallic tang of oil. 3 in 1 oil. The kind his father used to use every Sunday afternoon, a ritual as reliable as church. For Frank Mercer, at 63, the world had become a blur of empty strip malls and silent houses. The big box stores had won. They had swallowed the towns whole, and then, when they were done, they had simply moved on, leaving behind concrete ghosts. But Frank wasn't interested in the flat-screen TVs or the plastic furniture left to rot. He was looking for something else. Something everyone else had deemed worthless. He pressed his face against the cold glass of the shattered door of Stitcher's Paradise, a shop he'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. His wife, Eleanor, had been the one with the sewing room. The room that now sat untouched, a museum to a life half-finished. He hadn't opened that door in 2 years. Not since the funeral. But tonight, under the cover of a thunderstorm, he wasn't just a grieving widower. He was on a mission. A quiet, desperate heist. The beam of his small flashlight cut through the dusty air inside the shop. Bolts of fabric, faded by the sun, leaned against the walls like sleeping sentinels. Mannequins, headless and pale, stood in a silent congregation. But Frank wasn't looking at them. His light danced over empty shelves, searching for the one thing his contact, a woman named Clara from the community center, had whispered about. The last one. The one that still worked. And then he saw it. Tucked in the back corner, under a layer of dust so thick it looked like fur, was a shape. A familiar, cast-iron silhouette. His heart, which had felt like a stone in his chest for years, gave a sudden, painful lurch. It was a Singer 201. The same model Eleanor had always wanted. The Rolls-Royce of sewing machines. Heavy, industrial, and virtually indestructible. He moved toward it, his footsteps crunching on shattered glass and drywall. This wasn't stealing, he told himself. This was salvage. This was resurrection. This was for the mending circle Clara was trying to start. A group to repair clothes for the homeless shelter, to teach kids a skill that was dying. A small act of defiance in a world that only knew how to throw things away. He reached out a hand, his knuckles thick with arthritis. As his fingers touched the cold, smooth metal of the wheel, a sound stopped him cold. Asterisk scrape. Thump. Scrape. Asterisk. It wasn't the storm. It was inside the shop. The sound of someone else, moving through the dark. Frank froze, his breath catching in his throat. He clicked off his flashlight, plunging himself into absolute blackness. The sound of his own heartbeat was deafening. Was it the police? A squatter? Or was it someone else who knew the value of what was left in here? Someone who had come for the same thing. To understand why a man like Frank Mercer would be breaking into a derelict shop in the middle of the night, you have to go back. Back to a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks earlier. Frank was sitting in his usual spot at the back of the diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Retirement wasn't the golden years they sold you on. It was just a long, quiet waiting room. The waitress, a girl half his age with bright pink hair, had stopped asking if he wanted a warm-up. He was part of the furniture now. That's where Clara found him. She was in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair cropped short. She wasn't from around here. She had that big city energy that made Frank uncomfortable. She slid into the booth across from him without asking. Frank Mercer, she said. It wasn't a question. He just looked at her. I'm Clara. I knew your wife. We volunteered together at the Historical Society, years ago. She was a force. At the mention of Eleanor, a crack appeared in Frank's stony exterior. He nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. I'm starting something, Clara continued, her voice low and urgent. A mending circle. Down at the old community center on Elm. We're going to teach people how to repair their own clothes. Patch a jacket, darn a sock. Keep things out of the landfill. Fight back against this disposable world. Frank just grunted. Sounds like a lot of work. It is, Clara agreed. And we have one big problem. We need machines. Good, old, cast iron machines that can handle the work. The ones that were built to last. I've been scouring estate sales, thrift stores, but they're gone, Frank. All shipped overseas or melted down for scrap. There's only one place left that might have them. She leaned in closer. The old textile district. The shops that went under when the mall opened 20 years ago. They're still standing, empty. The owners just walked away. The machines are still inside, gathering dust, waiting to be saved. Frank looked at her, a flicker of something, interest, maybe, in his tired eyes. So why don't you just go get them? Because it's not legal, Clara said flatly. The buildings are technically owned by a holding company in another state. We'd be trespassing, breaking and entering. I'm too old for a jail cell, Frank. But I'm not too old to ask for help. She placed a small, folded piece of paper on the table. It was a list. Addresses. These are the shops. If someone brave were to acquire a few machines and perhaps leave them on the doorstep of the community center, no questions asked, well, that person would be a hero to a lot of people. She stood up to leave. Eleanor always said you were the most stubborn man she ever met. She meant it as a compliment. She said you never gave up on anything you started. She paused at the edge of the table. I hope she was right. Now, standing in the dark, listening to the intruder approach, Frank felt the weight of that challenge. Stubborn. He had been too stubborn to go into her sewing room. Too stubborn to learn the names of the fabrics she loved. Too stubborn to see that she was building a world of color and creation right under his nose while he sat silent in his den. The scraping stopped. Frank held his breath. He could feel the presence of another person in the room. The air itself felt different. Charged. He slowly, carefully, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy wrench. It wasn't a weapon, he told himself. It was a tool. A tool for a job. A beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness from the other side of the shop, sweeping across the floor. Frank pressed himself against a shelf, the dust filling his nostrils, forcing him to fight a sneeze. The light moved closer to the Singer 201. To his machine. He had to do something. He couldn't let them take it. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a key. A key to a door he had kept locked for 2 years. With a surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt in decades, Frank stepped out of the shadows, the wrench held tight in his trembling hand. Don't move, he said, his voice a dry rasp in the dead air. The other flashlight whipped around, blinding him. Frank squinted, raising an arm to shield his eyes. Frank! A woman's voice, sharp with surprise, cut through the tension. The light lowered. And there, standing 10 feet away, looking just as startled and guilty as he felt, was Clara. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain hammered against the roof, filling the silence. What are you doing here? Frank finally managed, his voice thick with confusion and a touch of betrayal. You sent me. Clara looked pale, her city confidence replaced by a nervous energy. I sent you to the shops on Elm Street, she said, her voice tight. This isn't Elm Street. This is on Adams. This is different. Different how? Frank demanded, not lowering the wrench. Clara sighed, a deep, weary sound. She walked over to the Singer 201, running her hand over its surface with a reverence that Frank recognized. It was the same way Eleanor used to touch her fabrics. These machines, Clara said softly, they're not just for a community mending circle, Frank. That part is real. That's my heart. But this one, this specific model. She tapped the metal. This is the one they want. Who's they? Frank's knuckles were white on the wrench. A private collector. A man named Prescott. He owns half the luxury boutiques in the tri-state area. He's been buying up all the vintage industrial machines for years. Not to use them. To lock them away in a warehouse. To control the market, the history, the knowledge. He's the reason there are none left. He's the reason the textile district died. Frank's mind was reeling. This wasn't just a simple heist of goodwill. This was something bigger. Darker. He's having the rest of these buildings demolished next week, Clara continued, her voice urgent. Everything inside, gone. I've been watching him for months. I knew he'd miss one. This shop, Stitcher's Paradise, it was owned by a recluse who never registered his inventory properly. Prescott's people don't know it's here. So you used me, Frank said, the hurt raw in his voice. You told me a story about a mending circle to get me to be your thief. Clara met his gaze. The mending circle is real. And we will get machines from the other shops. I needed you for this one because I can't do it alone. It's too heavy. Anne. She hesitated. I was scared to do it alone. I've been watching this place for a week. I saw you coming tonight. I followed you. Before Frank could respond, a new sound cut through the storm. The crunch of tires on gravel outside. Then the sound of a car door closing. Then, another. They both looked at the shattered front door. Headlights from a large, dark SUV swept across the front of the building, illuminating the rain in stark, white lines. Prescott. Frank whispered. Clara shook her head, her face ashen. He wouldn't come himself. He hires people. Heavy footsteps splashed through puddles. A gruff voice shouted over the storm. Johnson, check the back. The tip said someone's been poking around here for a week. Frank and Clara stood frozen, caught in the beam of their own flashlight which was still on the floor. They were trapped. Hide, Frank hissed, shoving Clara toward a rack of old coats. He clicked off their flashlight and dove behind a large cutting table just as a powerful beam of light sliced through the shop's interior. Frank peered from behind the table. He could see two men. Big men, in dark suits that were getting soaked by the rain. They weren't police. They moved with the confidence of men who were paid to intimidate. The first man, the one who had spoken, walked directly toward the back of the shop. Toward the singer. He pulled a tablet from his inside pocket, glancing at it, then at the machine. He smiled. Well, look what we have here. The boss is going to be very happy. He pulled out his phone. Get the truck around back. We need to load this up tonight. Frank looked over at Clara, hidden in the coats. Her eyes were wide with fear. He looked back at the machine. At the symbol of Eleanor, of a forgotten world, of a community's last hope. He couldn't let them take it. Not to some rich man's vault. An idea, crazy and desperate, formed in his mind. He looked down at his wrench. It wasn't much. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to fight the men. He just had to fight the system. He caught Clara's eye and pointed subtly toward the back door, then made a winding motion with his finger. Asterisk the machine. The wheel. The belt. Asterisk. Clara frowned, then her eyes widened in understanding. While the two goons were busy talking by the front, Frank began to move. Silently, on hands and knees, he crawled toward the machine. The last sewing machine on Earth. He wasn't going to let them steal it. He was going to make sure it could never be moved. Frank reached the singer. He could hear the men arguing by the door about the best way to get the truck in. He had seconds. He slid under the heavy wooden table the machine was mounted on. The guts of the machine were exposed beneath, a tangle of leather belts, gears, and tension springs. He didn't know how a sewing machine worked. Eleanor had tried to show him once. He had been watching a ball game. He had dismissed it. The memory stabbed at him now with painful clarity. But he understood machines. He understood tension and release. He found the main drive belt, a thick, dry-rotted loop of leather. He took his wrench and, with a surge of desperate strength, he didn't smash it. He simply pried the bolt that held the tension pulley. Pop. The belt went slack. He reached deeper, finding a crucial linkage rod that connected the foot pedal to the machine's mechanism. He yanked a cotter pin, and the rod clattered to the floor, harmless. He had just performed a mechanical heist in reverse. He hadn't destroyed it. He had just disabled it. Made it immobile. Made it useless to anyone who didn't have the time and knowledge to fix it. "The truck's here, let's move," the lead goon yelled. Frank scrambled out from under the table and dove back behind the cutting table just as the two men returned with a dolly. "All right, easy now. This thing is worth a fortune," the first man grunted as they tried to tip the singer onto the dolly. But when they tried to lift it, the machine, no longer connected to its base properly, shifted awkwardly. The heavy arm wobbled, and the table frame they were trying to tip it on splintered. The belt, now loose, flopped pathetically. "What the hell?" the man said, looking at the underside. "This thing's a mess. The whole mechanism is shot. It's just a hunk of junk." The other man shined his light on it. "Tip was wrong. This is a parts machine, not a runner. Not worth the effort. Leave it. The demo crew can take it to the dump next week." They stood there for a moment, frustrated. Then, with a final curse, they abandoned the machine and walked out into the rain. The truck's engine started, and the sound of tires faded into the storm. The shop was silent again, save for the rain. Frank and Clara waited a full 5 minutes before moving. Finally, they emerged from their hiding spots. Clara looked at the machine, then at Frank. A slow smile spread across her face. "You're a genius," she whispered. "No," Frank said, looking at the machine with a new kind of respect. "I'm just stubborn." They worked quickly, but calmly. They found a hand truck in the back room and carefully, reverently, loaded the disabled singer onto it. It took all their combined strength. As they pushed it out the back door into the rain, Frank felt a strange sensation. It wasn't just the weight of the machine. It was the lifting of a weight from his own chest. They loaded it into Clara's old pickup truck, covering it with a tarp. 3 days later, Frank stood in the brightly lit community center on Elm Street. The room was buzzing with life. 5 vintage sewing machines, rescued from the other shops on Clara's list, sat on tables, each one being used by someone. A teenager was mending the knee of his jeans. A young mother was fixing a baby blanket. An old man, about Frank's age, was carefully stitching a patch onto a work jacket. And in the corner of honor, on a sturdy table, sat the singer 201. Clara had found a local repairman, an 80-year-old wizard who knew these machines inside and out. He had fixed Frank's sabotage in an hour. The machine was purring, a smooth, powerful hum. Clara was guiding a young girl's hands as she fed a piece of fabric through the presser foot. The girl looked up, beaming, as a straight, perfect line of stitches appeared. Frank just watched, leaning against the wall. He wasn't participating. He was observing. But then, Clara caught his eye. She nodded toward the singer. Toward the empty chair in front of it. He felt a pull. An irrational, terrifying pull. He thought of Eleanor's room. The closed door. The silence. He pushed off the wall. He walked slowly across the room, the chatter and the hum of the machines filling his ears like a symphony. He sat down in the empty chair. He placed his hands on the cold, familiar metal. He looked at the wheel, the needle, the spool pin. He didn't know how to start. He didn't know the first thing about threading it. But for the first time in 2 years, he didn't feel the weight of the silence. He felt the potential of a new stitch. He looked up, and for the first time since Eleanor died, a small, real smile touched his lips. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more interesting, realistic stories. Your support helps us create even more amazing content.